R.Sreenivasan. It's my privilege and honor to be the moderator for this session. This session I feel could be a very important session for Africa as much for India. This is for what we say is, it is called How Will AI Transform Africa? I have had the privilege of being around for the last couple of years in Africa. One of the foremost institutions of technology from India, it's called Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, that has been set up, a campus has been set up here in Africa as an outreach or capacity building exercise of India. India has set up one IIT here, and another institution is in Kampala, National Institute of Forensic Sciences. So as a nation, India, perhaps in the next decade, will have many more institutions coming up here. And as part of IIT's contribution, we started doing data science AI retreats for CXOs in Africa. So in the last 1 year, we did 3 data science AI retreats. About 140 CXOs are attended it. So that is my insights. That's where I got my insights into AI in Africa. So I had the honor of having very eminent panel here. So I first invite Ambassador Thigo, MPS, sir, please. Ambassador Thigo is a visionary leader at the intersection of technology, governance and development. He's advisor to the President of Kenya on technology broadly. So because I want to keep limited time, so I'll quickly. So I introduce the next panelist, Dr. Shreeram Iyer. He's a founder of Prisma.ai, a pioneering company specializing in vision-based artificial intelligence solutions and headquartered in Singapore with presence including in India and the US. If you're traveling to airports, etc., if the systems are recognizing you, perhaps Prisma.ai is behind it. I now introduce Shreyas Patel, the Managing Director of the Axestrack, and he has been working here in Africa in AI and IoT, etc. So the way we go about, because we are running behind schedule, so we will have Shreyas. So what I will do is, so I will give you each one, because we will do line up in 20-25 minutes, including the question answers. Yeah. So I will give each one of you about 3 minutes. So about 10 minutes we will consume that. Then we will do, because when questions get bombarded, perhaps we will have greater interaction. So may I invite Ambassador to speak on technology and Kenya and Africa and AI, all the things that you can slide in 3 minutes. Wow. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
We don't have anybody. Good afternoon. Very good afternoon. There you go.
Thank you so much for giving this opportunity, and I know it's too much to pack. Sorry in 3 minutes, but I think if you think about technology, and I know people talk about technology, it's all about sense. I really want to focus on critical and emerging technologies across the 4 stacks, right? It's data, compute, talent, and particular use cases, which is where I think we need a lot of investments. So we think about issues around compute, right? So Africa has only 2% of global data centers. That tells you something. And half of that is in Southern Africa. And so I think for me that's the biggest opportunity, because Africa currently only has about 1,000 GPUs the last time I checked. The current investments collectively that we can see is an additional 12,000 GPUs, and those are about H200s, which are not really so much. So for me, that's the compute opportunity that we have around just getting us on the level around critical energy technologies. Part of also that stack is, of course, the energy that powers that. Kenya's energy generation capacity, I'm sure you've heard, is about 3.5 gigawatts. We need almost 100 of that if you're going to power this ridiculously consuming industrial revolution. The other part, of course, is connectivity. Currently only about 42%. Regionally about 28%. So you can see the connectivity opportunity. And I'm not talking about even the quality of connectivity, I'm talking about connectivity. So it's around satellite, including terrestrial and fiber. We have about 6 to 7 fiber optic cables coming in already. There are 7th one coming in from Italy called Sparkle. The existing ones are not AI ready. So there's a business opportunity of AI ready fiber connectivity to land here. A lot of it even lands in India and comes to Kenya, so why not add 2 or 3 more, especially for sovereignty, geopolitics, and redundancy. When I come to the other stack around data, as we know, we talk about data bias, but African data is not digitized. So there's a whole trove of digitization of our data. Of course, we're talking about sovereign here, so it needs to be done locally. So I think there's an entire thing around that. The third one, of course, is talent. We've seen what is happening geopolitically. I mean, very difficult to get scholarships or visas to go study in the US and the UK right now. I think the waits are, I'm talking about 2 months, 3 months, if you can get. So I see the India, Kenya, Africa collaboration around building talent. And we know all the best talent, let's be honest, comes from India, when it's about digital critical energy technologies. Now the final stack, which is the use cases piece, whether it's improving healthcare, precision agriculture, climate and climate smart capability, educational alignment. I mean, I have in my office 25 use cases, as I speak, that are AI professional use cases, and all of them are investable. And that is, and we are leading, so you can imagine my colleagues in other countries, what opportunities they have. Kenya, 57 million, Eastern Africa market of 500 million. So if you even just use that, then that's already a big business opportunity. So I wanted to end with those 4 stars: data, compute, talent, use cases.
Thank you. You eliminated 3 minutes. Thank you very much. Shreeram, thank you.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Okay, brief about what we do. Thank you. So, Prisma.ai predominantly is one of the largest computer vision companies in the world. What we do is we make cameras intelligent. If you go into airports like Singapore, Dubai, airports in Berlin, few airports, about 9 out of 13 airports in India is using our technology. Using highways in Italy, Germany, Deutsche Bahn, or in Autostrade, still are using us. So where are we coming from? Where is AI? AI is all about what we do, what we see. As I think the ambassadors say, it's more of data. It's more of utilizing data, utilizing cloud, understanding data getting it from, and most important, using it. So that's the thought process we're coming from. So we being as the largest players in the world in computer vision, what we do is we make data right for you, make data read for you, see for you, and then give a decision science based on that. So coming from aspect of what we talk about India, Africa coming together, India has a lot of potential in terms of what we can give as what is the leverage on. So as we see, we heard the panels talking about developing countries around. So we are a developing country, we agree. The best part of that is we have a lot to do and we can do a lot. Those countries which have been saturated. So what we found difficult in countries in the Western world is the data mitigation, because that system is already there. They don't have more adaptation. So they have to reinvent the entire aspect of data integration. But we, on the other hand, who are developing right now, have the adaptability where we can adapt more and more. We can reinvent whatever is to be done is already started. And we are in a stage where we can now implement digitization. The best part of this UPI example which is given. Why we are the largest, we are the best in the world right now, we crossed a visa because our adapters are open. We had the progressive or non-developed activity before, developing activity right now, and think to go would be developed on. but the ones who were there before have now reinvented again. We found this application interface to be developed in various countries in the European region or in US part when we did it. It was difficult. The entire thing had to be churned out. So I understand there is a lot of scalability that could happen around into various regions. Specifically spaces like, so we have 3 layers of data. When in the first layer, people understand scale AI, one of the largest acquisitions was done by Meta. Was annotation which was required by, so that's the kind of BPO industry which Ram was talking about, was required during service industry. The annotation industry, one of the first largest industry coming in future, because that much data would be required every for it could be computer vision, it could be voice, it could be number data would be used by hundreds of companies. So one of them was AI, and then we met bought over, but there are multiple more data located around. That's the first layer of it. Then writing companies could be formed as entrepreneurs being creating small businesses, where these businesses could create their own layers to make solutions at various instances. It could be airports, highways, logistics, or deliverables, you name them, and these solutions could be used by end users. So from a perspective of AI is going to disrupt jobs. It's not going to take away jobs. The disruption here would be to modernize it, to understand, to scale the human beings' talent from a different perspective to what they're seeing it, and to a different perspective, what could be done. So what, if I would say, was done 3 decades back, and a account would say, IT is coming, I've lost my job. That's not the case right now. Every accountant uses an infrastructure of IT and computer right now, and that's what the scalability would be. Entrepreneur, a user, employee, and employer would use AI for every aspect of his life, and it'll be everyday life what we're talking about. And you inculcate that into your everyday living, you make it more easier to handle.
Indeed. Because I'm sure all of us are exposed to some tools or applications of AI, and many times even those reels on Instagram shock us in terms of how AI is getting implemented, and we cannot be left behind, and especially Africa cannot be left behind. So talking of Africa, I will invite Shreyas to share your little experiences and so on and so forth.
Sure, thank you very much. So, good afternoon. My name is Shreyas Patel. My photos are not up here, but to give you a bit of a background, I'm currently working within the insurtech space and also in the logistics space for Africa. And I'd like to actually give you some sort of idea of exactly where we apply AI and how we're also working with Indian companies to actually make that much more possible within our content, within our continent itself. So once, let me look at where AI is getting really applied within the insurance sector. I run and founded a company called Himalaya. It's actually a organization which basically allows for on-demand insurance for motor vehicles. So we apply insurance policies for private, commercial, and agricultural sectors. And AI has really sort of now changing the game in terms of what we do for fraud claims. Fraudulent claims is a big issue within the African context. And how do we actually apply certain chatbots and certain applications to actually improve the seamless process of claims. And that has now become more prevalent in an insurance sector. We also use it for interaction, so UX. So agentic AI is now becoming such a big topic, but still very much in an infancy stage. Now, when I move into the transport sector, in logistics, I represent a company called Axestrack, as we mentioned earlier on, for Africa. We look at AI data analytics for the logistics sector. So what happens is basically, if you're looking at transportation trucks, we have at least around about 400,000 trucks going in from Kenya across the region, carrying high-value goods. And how do they actually manage operational efficiency? My background in the past was actually running a tracking fleet management business here in Kenya for 13 years. So we understood exactly how IoT or telematics solutions were installed in vehicles. So that was creating data. Now, when we started off, that data was just used for analytics on a CSV file, Excel sheet. You find a lot of fleet managers would sit there, decipher this information, but by the time that information was given out to the CEOs, you're talking about a week to at least even some of the clients we saw, a month. Now with AI, we can look at real-time information coming out to those owners of fleets and also the fleet managers. So ultimately what we're doing is basically taking that data from telematics, which has now become a commodity. It's actually now, it's pre-installed in vehicles, etc. And how do you actually now use that data to improve operational efficiency? So in terms of how we look at it, the organization I represent is based out of Jaipur. We look at close to around 400,000 vehicles just in India, but now we are also having operations in America, in GSU, the GC countries, in the Middle East, and now of course in Africa. We're taking that data and now creating AI agents to allow for simple operations. So when I give you examples of simple operations, it's, say for example, a fleet manager, his biggest problem, and in fact the owner of the fleet, his biggest problems are drivers. How do you manage drivers? And each time they actually talk to these drivers, they're constantly on the phone. Talk to them, to get a minute out of them in a meeting is impossible, because their biggest headache is the driver. What we've done is actually automate that process to actually talk to the drivers, escalate it when it needs to be, and AI can learn from what those drivers are doing to actually give better information in real time to the fleet operators and the companies which actually run those. That's one basic example to it. Now we're also looking at how we link in ERPs to their operational fleet management software. Now that's the new side of what AI is doing through a protocol called MCP. It's Model Context Protocol, where we can now create agents which link in to ERP solutions to then allow you to actually get information on the cost per kilometer per truck to the operator. Now that's powerful information, that's real powerful information, which we didn't get in the previous one. So those are kind of simple examples of where we're applying AI to an African context. You have to start small to think big. And that's really the key thing. But one thing which we've actually learned, and I give you one example of where AI has created a very interesting genre within African context, is they're using it for emotions and mental health. We're finding a lot more studies coming out. Harvard just recently did a study on it and said the top 10 really use cases within AI across the world, as they say, for 25 in 2025, it's all pretty much for emotion and mental stimulus. And one example I know for a company here who created a chatbot to help border drivers, talk between themselves or actually, look at better insurance policies and so forth. They found out that the border drivers were actually using AI chatbots to actually for emotional stimulus. And so those are things which are really interesting to come out from the usage of AI. The topic is so large.
Shreeram, you want to add something? Because it's coming into your vision AI.
So,
Emotion.
I was talking about it, when he's talking about emotion sentiments coming around. We do it through the airports in Singapore and Dubai and other parts of the world, wherein now you understand, the camera is intelligent to understand whether you need support, a person who's falling down because of an incident, or a person is, a female is pregnant, or a family is having kids around. The camera is intelligent to take a decision based on that they would need support and sends notification in real time as a decision science to the software there, saying that they need them, they need support, and the guy goes in support. So instead of somebody calling and getting panicked around what is to be done, the camera is not intelligent to what is to be done. The same thing happens in kitchens, where we did something in Singapore where we could understand a process flow which was defined, and there was some adulteration in food done during that time in a kitchen. And the camera would now say that this SOP is being breached, and the real-time mapping has to be done, and the shop floor again in charge, the person who is in charge says, okay, this is the person who is loitering around, did some adulteration, stuff like that. So that's what computer vision is about. Whatever you see, it is typically your eye. So whatever your eye is seeing, the camera is seeing. The computing power is the GPUs behind, it's like your brain talks and it's
I love when tech is going to the and so on. I think more practical, and I think and this is about investment, and I think context is important. So what, for example, innovators have been able to do with computer vision here is to train cameras to be able to look at crops. Right? And so I think for me, if you look at, 60% of our land is basically the African continent. Right. And the majority is here. So how do we convert these kind of capabilities to really solve those kind of problems? Right? So that because of climate change, farmers can be able to have intelligent decisions to be able then to ensure that you have a full life cycle of a crop. Traceability, right? Across the value chain. So we cannot be mapping this. My office now is actually doing an entire AI opportunities map across the country because we realize that our use cases are so specific, but also with AI, for example, daily, just using just a strip to dip into a liter of milk, we've been able to empower farmers to increase their milk output 3 times.
Yeah, so
less than 6 months, right? No new money, just a strip.
Yeah. It's the ecosystem you create around.
Thank you. Marty, I just want to, there are quite a few CXOs here whom I met for the data science AI retreats to invite them. Ambassador, I just want to share something I realized. It takes immense effort to convince the leaders of African continent or the enterprises to take the leap of faith when we look at AI. Because it took enormous effort, and also they do share quite a few things in private in terms of social, political, all those things, which is not allowing them to take the lead. Whereas we are seeing the whole world is changing so fast, but African leadership in terms of, because the economy is also driven by policies, right? And they always have a fear of certain things. So I would like to ask you why why there are barriers, or why is this slow adoption? What do you, because as a person who is advising the president of the country and so on and so forth, I think we would like to hear, and maybe I would like to even ask a couple of CXOs who have met in the past to share their fears, if they can openly share.
I know, honestly, and my president is very unique, I'll be very honest. I'm the only tech envoy in Africa. It tells you something, right? 1 in 55, 21 global. So it tells you just in terms of the vision of how we think. So I don't have the same challenge, and I don't think Kenya has the same challenge as those other African countries who are struggling to understand the value of technology.
And I just want to share that all the data science workshops we had is between Kenya and Tanzania. But even in Kenya, it is very, very difficult to move the leaders.
That was the second part, right? So there's of course high-level leadership that gets it, but then I think it's really an issue of fluency, and everybody knows me and you talk about this. Because the challenge is, the first one is the mindset, right? So, because when they look at artificial intelligence, it's always been messaged as an ICT, right? And so think about a leader. When you come and tell them AI, the first thing he tells you is go to that ICT person.
Right? You get to the tech guy.
Exactly.
It's so we can start this one.
So I think the biggest issue I think for me, and when I talk about capacity, honestly, I never talk about capacity of the ecosystem. I talk about capacity of the leaders, right? So that to understand that AI is not an ICT issue. It's a GPT, right? It's a general purpose technology. And so I think for me that's the shift. Like always, the second part, once you get fluency with the leaders, is then to focus on the benefits. I always tell people the example of African leaders is their response to technology is always tied to their first experience of that technology. So if that first experience with that technology is negative, that becomes the normative engagement framework. So private sector, and if you look at stuff that I do is proactively bring out the technologies quickly, don't ask. Do in a way that leaders experience the positivity of that technology. That's what happened with mobile money. We never had regulations before that. There's already a sandbox mentality. Even the leaders, they get that, right? But then there's nothing in the sandbox because you're busy waiting for policy. So I think it's industry that needs to shift the narrative and the norm of engagement, because you're blaming somebody who has no clue about what you're talking about. 1. 2, the only thing they understand is fear. So you kind of have to start to implement that, and so that's what I've been working on.
No, I am asking this especially because as a person who is driving force behind the technology and AI and so on and so forth in Kenya, what is it that you personally and the leadership in Kenya are doing to help the leaders of the private enterprise to make that shift? What is it that?
That's easy. Even yesterday morning. So we hosted a Smart Club Summit. Shreeram, I'm sure is here. So and so a lot of the I do a lot of the convening is one. The second part is that you will understand this, right? So all the private sector leaders depend on their CIOs and the CTOs. You'll be shocked that we even have a capacity challenge with the CIOs and the CTOs. And because if I go to a CIO, then go to the CTO. Their CTOs are not going to say, I don't know about this thing. Right? So part of what I'm doing with the CIO network is to train CIOs and CTOs to be the best advisors to the leadership around investing in these types of technologies. We're also looking at recalibrating public service and public sector, because think about it, there's no African country with a CIO or CTO. Right? So a lot of the people you're dealing with are ICT folks. So there's a mismatch. I call it translation. There's a mismatch around that. So I always talk about reimagining and reinventing public sector in the era of intelligence. Because you cannot, if you don't have a counterpart on that side, who are you talking to? Right? So you're talking to somebody who's not built or calibrated for that conversation. So this is, and that's why for me it's a transition, not just on technology. It's a transition around how public sector and private sector engage.
It's a mindset and also the
Transition mechanics of it, so especially the talent piece. That is a big deal. The third part, I think for Kenyans, we have something called an action lab. If you look at the papers, we launched something yesterday with the government secretary, who's also the coordinator of government. We're calling it diplomacy or technology diplomacy. And the idea is to create a space where we have co-creation, right? Government, civil society, tech. And I really want to see some of the technology companies are part of that, because I have all the big techs. I mean, I don't think everybody's here, including innovators, so that we can work together. Because things around AI is nothing to tell. How do you explain computer vision? You can't explain it, and unless you work with somebody, so they see what computer vision is. And that's what we've done. So I have a lab in Kenya. We are doing one in a couple of countries, about 3 countries. We are doing an AI factory with 5 countries. So we're doing these collaboratives so that we can work on things together, so that people can actually see. Otherwise, I mean, I have the same problem. Like, I'm trying to explain to some things. First of all, I went into a room and Shima knows this joke. I talked about AI for 2 hours. Nobody knew what it was. They thought it was artificial insemination, right? So you might think it's funny, but that's the truth. So fluency and language is also a problem, but you can only do it by learning.
Well, that's precisely why we started the Lessons AI retreats, to create awareness and also eagerness and immerse the CXOs, the leadership. Until the leadership does not take it up, it's very difficult to move. Shreeram, you might have had such experiences in quite a few countries,
Sure.
and I'm sure some of those 1 or 2 instances where your intervention or the process that could change the mindset and people started moving. Is there such thing?
Yes, there are many of them. So I'll give you background of, I have a PhD from MIT Boston. I do teachers and AI faculty there on these occasions. But during those course of time, I met one of those leaders from the African continent, and she was an ex-MIT, and she was part of it. So she could adapt it. She could understand the change to be done as a structural change. What is to be done? So probably what we created is, I'm also talking to a couple of more sections in the African continent, just like Africa, is that there should be a paradigm change in the system to be done around. So create an excellence centers around. So it could be a joint venture application pertaining to a knowledge center from industrial sector to an university aspect, from the government leading it from, to create one kind of pool of excellence center where you create these nuances of what could be done on computer vision, what could be done on other vision, like creating NLPs around, creating algos, or creating cognitive based applications on various applications that go on AI fraternity. So those applications which we started on, yes, they are created now as we talk, have got into the forums, they have got into their ecosystems, into the universities, creating a small, as what you were talking about, creating IITs in here. And that is exactly what we need to do, to educate people on what AI could do. And is it going to be a part of you? Yes, it's going to be a part of you. And what is going to happen is those who are going to implement it as solutions in aviation, it could be solutions in highways, in policing, or so on and so forth, as computer vision. Or it could be in stock markets or financial industries in number games or LLMs there. Could be a right kind of aspect for the new generation, as gentleman Ms. Moy was saying, that it's a 20% is a 20-year age of average in Africa. It's a beautiful age, it's a nice age that people could learn around. So you have a vast knowledge base you can get in to create a complete knowledge and wealth. That's what I was talking in the first discussion. I said you could create multiple scale AIs here as entrepreneurship, and this could be because of these excellence centers to create those knowledge bases around. That could be the thought process. That's what we did in one or two countries. I'm happy in Dubai asked me to come in to talk about it, and they are doing some excellence centers for various countries around. So we can look around completely.
Shreyas, because you've been doing all your projects in Africa, and I'm sure that there have been barriers that you have to cross. Are there any very interesting on an episode or something that could be of value to, how do you help, because there are many CXOs from Africa here, how do you help them to cross that barrier to invest?
Yeah, no, sure. That's a great question. Firstly, I appreciate what you were talking about in terms of collaboration. I recently gave a talk to an NGO in the country who really needed to understand exactly what they can do with AI to help small-scale farmers. So it was building the knowledge, the skills levels from organizational point of view for them to then translate it back to the grassroots. And I think, from a private sector, it's really quite useful for us to be involved in that area, because we do tend to get muddled up in governmental policies and the likes, and we're a lot more agile from the private sector side of things. So what we did was basically look at it in terms of where they can actually harness the capability of AI, so they understand as an NGO, who then can go out to the small-scale farmers and actually now improve their lives. At the end of the day, the small-scale farmer just needs to actually make more money. How do you actually make more money? Is to actually now use tools which can actually become much more available to them through smartphones and so on and so forth. But we can't go straight to them and say, look, this is what it's going to do. It's going to give you better information on climate, etc. Unless organizations who are directly working in those areas understand it. So from a perspective of how we can collaborate from an Indian perspective, you have the biggest population, one of the biggest populations in the world, and you're looking at the poverty levels are so high that you've already done work in that area. And how does that translate back to our concepts, so to speak? And with AI, we can now change language, so there's no language barriers. What we really need to look at is how the cultural differences come across. We, as I mentioned earlier on, I work with an Indian company. If you look at the way they scale up from from an Indian perspective, if you bring those best practices to Africa, the sales cycles are much longer. But you're really looking at how that collaborative process can occur, and keeping expectations in check. So that's where I find a good sort of takeaway over the past couple of years.
So we're short of time. So before we wind up, I will throw open for questions from the audience. Anybody would like to? How many of us in our organizations or corporates use AI integral to our organizations? Yeah, we'd like to, just coming to you. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Ed Craig from Beach Payments. My question, I guess, is to the whole, is really AI has been built predominantly with Caucasian, that was my right word, facial recognition. How do we address that for an African, Indian, kind of uptake on this? Thanks.
I think it's all very biased, right? So, and think about it. And, well, I'm part of the UNI advisory body, and we really did a lot of work on this in the last 2 years. And one thing we really realized that it wasn't really deliberate bias. It was bias simply because of the engineering, right? So, and that's why sometimes I said that talent is important. Because you do not expect somebody in Silicon Valley to know the trademark Patel in and how it looks like. So they build it based on their own innate bias, not just because of their own lived experience. The second part, of course, is what you mentioned around the data. You realize that a lot of, at least African data is not alike, right? So this is not, and think about it, a lot of this data was trained from online data sets. How you mitigate that, I said, 1, 2 is think about sovereign AI, right? So sovereign AI meaning, how do you build a stack? And from my talk, I didn't talk about use cases, I talked about the stack. Right? So we need to build the compute, we need to have CF, we need to ingest our own data. Ingesting your data means we need Indians and Kenyans to be the ones ingesting the data. Because part of developing the data is non-biased, right? And then of course, the other piece is to ensure that talent is resilient. Because we could not be biased in the inception stage, but tomorrow we keep on changing. So how do we keep on updating the talent so that the biases?
Very beautiful. So as far as what he said, what meant a lot of it. When he says data is important, so when you say biases pertaining to an individual facial recognition, the data was most aspect around. So as we talk about facial recognition, we probably process transactions in the financial sectors. We do facial recognition in airports or highways. Now, when it comes to data, wherever the data is possibly available, whether you have those terabytes of data available, the computer will perhaps runs through it and can give you a decision based on it. But if you don't have the data, that's where I said that there would be multiple scale AIs coming in the concept content here, because you need to make those data available here. The first step is to get those data available here. When you have these two data around, then you have these models running over it. When you have the models running over the data, then your decision starts working around. So there would be no biasness post once you get that. So the most important aspect is as air, whatever human being, data is for AI. The more you have data, the more you need unbiased around it. And your decision starts the aspect of it.
Yeah, Shreyas and I were actually discussing one of the stuff before. And one of the challenges that usually expressed by CXOs is consciously or unconsciously, you don't grab the data. So the moment you don't have data, nothing can work. With the, I want this issue of last word from
Sure. No, so I'll give you a simple example of exactly facial recognition and how AI can actually work on it. I take examples of the trucking industry. You know, we have video telematics in these trucks, which actually take video imaging and facial recognition to actually see if the truck driver has actually had enough sleep, or is how long has he been on the road. But the information we get firstly is that truck driver's information is the photos taken, so that we know exactly who it is. And then the AI will start now looking at it, saying, hey, is he sleepy? How long has he been on the road? Is he speeding? Is he slowing? All of those data comes into play for us to then use that facial recognition side of things. But I can understand where you're coming from.
Thank you. I'm sorry, really sorry I have to stop here because already, though we exceeded 22 minutes now. But thank you very much. We are all here. It will be a pleasure to engage and interact with the three of us. Thanks, Ambassador, for taking time.